Carl Jung explained, letting go isn't the end. It's the beginning of your sacred self in the fading light, where day bleeds softly into night. The ego begins to loosen its grip. It is a twilight, not just of the sun, but of the self as we have known it, the structure built of habits, defenses, and stories woven to sustain identity. This twilight is not a gentle ending, but a sacred threshold, a dim and sacred space where the familiar begins to dissolve like mist retreating at dawn. Here, on this edge between the known and the abyss, the soul stirs in restless anticipation. The ego, that ever-watchful sentinel of consciousness, has long held its place as the master of our waking world. It has shaped our view, forged our boundaries, and cast a protective shadow against the chaotic unknown. Yet in this dusk, the ego's authority falters. The walls that once kept the darkness at bay begin to thin, revealing the depths beneath, the vast unconscious, dark and fertile, calling the self towards something greater than the persona's fragile mask. To surrender is not defeat, but a secret rite, an initiation into the sacred dance of transformation. In relinquishing control, the soul opens the door to mystery, to the vast inner wilderness where new life quietly waits. The ego's twilight is not the end, but the beginning, a descent into silence where the old self must die so that the true self may emerge. This liminal space between consciousness and unconsciousness is neither light nor dark. It is the meeting, place of opposites, the sacred pause in the heart of enantiodromia. The tension between holding on and letting go, between identity and dissolution, is the crucible where individuation begins. Here beneath the fading light, the self becomes both witness and wanderer, ready to journey into the unknown depths. The ego's grasp loosens as the voice of the unconscious rises in subtle whispers, dreams, symbols, feelings long repressed. These murmurs stir the soul like a distant flame, flickering in the shadowed corners of awareness. They beckon the self to move beyond the surface, to look beyond the polished persona that masks our vulnerability and fragmented wholeness. Within this twilight, the persona, the social mask crafted from expectations and roles, begins to crack. Its rigid contours soften in the fading light, revealing glimpses of what lies beneath. The shadow, the raw and often unsettling parts of the psyche we deny or disown. To approach this darkness is to enter a sacred mystery, the alchemical nigredo, where old forms break down in preparation for rebirth. This moment is a sacred surrender, a voluntary collapse of the ego's fortress. It is a quiet unraveling, like the slow fall of autumn leaves, a letting go of the identities that no longer serve the soul's deeper yearning. In the silence of this passage, the self begins to awaken, an ancient, timeless presence beyond ego, beyond persona, beyond fear. The twilight of the ego is a liminal dawn, a paradoxical space where loss and gain entwine. The self loses its rigid shape only to find a more fluid, expansive essence beneath. It is a passage through fire and shadow into a deeper consciousness that holds the promise of wholeness. This process is neither quick nor easy. It demands courage, patience, and a willingness to dwell in uncertainty. Here, in this sacred space between the light and the dark, the soul remembers its original nature, not as a fragmented ego, but as a living, breathing manifestation of the self, the totality beyond separation. It is the archetypal journey of descent and return, a mythic pattern echoed in stories from Orpheus to the hero's call. The ego's twilight is the herald of this inward pilgrimage. As the ego fades, the self is invited to listen, to the silence, to the stillness beneath thought, to the sacred whispers of the unconscious. This listening is an act of reverence, a sacred openness to the unknown. It is the beginning of an inner dialogue that will guide the soul through the labyrinth of transformation. In this silence, the soul encounters the mystery of symbolic death, the necessary death of the ego's old identity so the self may be born anew. This death is not annihilation, but transmutation, a sacred fire that burns away the dross to reveal the gold beneath. The ego must be released like a worn garment, making space for a new and more authentic embodiment. The path forward is uncertain, shadowed by doubt and fear, yet it is also illuminated by the gentle light of hope, the hope of awakening to a more profound truth beyond ego's limits. It is the hope that in surrender the self will find freedom, that in loss it will discover gain. The twilight is a sacred invitation to embrace paradox, to hold the tension between light and shadow, between loss and rebirth, between the ego's fading and the self's rising. This tension is the alchemical fire in which the soul is forged anew. In the fading light, the self steps forward, not as a conqueror, but as a pilgrim, a seeker walking the thin line between worlds. It is a walk into mystery, into the heart of the unconscious, where the deepest transformations await. The ego's twilight is the dawn of the sacred self's awakening. Here, the journey begins, not with certainty or control, but with trust and openness. The soul learns to let go of the known in order to discover the unknown depths within. It learns that letting go is not an end, but a beginning, a sacred surrender that opens the way to wholeness. The ego's twilight is the call to awaken from the illusion of separation, to remember that beneath all masks and shadows lies the eternal self, a presence beyond time, beyond fear, beyond loss. This is the sacred heart of the journey, the inner flame that guides us through the darkness toward the dawn. In this liminal space, the soul stands on the edge of transformation, ready to cross the threshold into the unknown. It is a moment of sacred pause, a breath held between death and rebirth, between letting go and receiving. Here, in the twilight of the ego, the journey of the sacred self begins. In the stillness that follows the ego's twilight, there is a stirring deep beneath the surface, a murmur from the shadow's hidden realm. It rises quietly, like a breath beneath frozen earth, a pulse in the silence where light has yet to reach. This shadow is the uncharted wilderness of the psyche, a dark sanctuary where forgotten wounds and forbidden desires lie folded like ancient scrolls, waiting to be unfurled. The shadow is no mere adversary to be conquered or cast away. It is a guardian of lost truths, a secret keeper of what the ego has rejected, denied, or silenced. To encounter the shadow is to enter a sacred paradox. The darkness is not the enemy, but a mysterious ally, an essential partner in the soul's alchemy. It holds the raw materials for transformation, fragments of the self abandoned in fear or shame, pieces that must be reclaimed if the journey toward wholeness is to unfold. Listening to the shadow is an act of courage and tenderness. It demands that we lean into discomfort, into the unfamiliar terrain of our own depths, where clarity dissolves into ambiguity. The voice of the shadow is silent, yet profound, whispering through dreams, symbols, and fleeting emotions. It calls the self beyond the safe confines of persona, into the inner wilderness where authenticity waits beneath the thorns. This shadow realm is a dark chrysalis, a sacred place of potential and mystery. Within it, the psyche undergoes its nigredo, the blackening, the symbolic death necessary before new life can emerge. The shadow's presence signals the start of a transformative descent, a journey into the unknown where light and dark entwine, where opposites meet and merge. To face the shadow is to embrace the alchemical principle of enantiodromia, the reversal of opposites that reveals hidden unity. The self learns that light cannot exist without shadow, that wholeness emerges from the integration of what has been split. The shadow's dark flame burns away illusion, illuminating the path toward a deeper, more expansive consciousness. In this silent dialogue, the soul becomes a witness to its own complexity. It sees its fears, its hidden yearnings, its capacity for both destruction and creation. The shadow is not a monster lurking outside, but a living part of the self, yearning to be known, to be loved, to be integrated. It is the wild heart of the psyche, beating beneath the calm surface of everyday life. This encounter awakens the inner wilderness, a vast, untamed landscape where growth happens not through control, but through surrender. The soul learns to walk, gently here, with reverence for the unknown and patience for the slow unfolding of truth. The shadow teaches that healing is not about erasing darkness, but about befriending it, allowing it to speak its sacred language. The journey with the shadow is deeply paradoxical. It asks us to confront what frightens us most, to welcome what we have tried to flee. Yet in this confrontation lies the seed of liberation, a freedom born from acknowledging the full spectrum of our being. The shadow's whispers guide the soul toward greater authenticity, dissolving the false divisions between light and dark, self and other. As the shadow unfolds its mysteries, the ego's fortress softens further, allowing the psyche to expand beyond its previous limits. This expansion is a sacred unraveling, a loosening of rigid identities that frees the self to grow into its fuller expression. The shadow becomes a doorway rather than a barrier, an invitation to step into the deeper rhythms of the soul. This passage is not without pain or fear. The shadow's revelations can shake the foundations of self-understanding, challenging the narratives we have long held as true. But this shaking is a necessary shaking, like the breaking of the seed beneath the earth. It prepares the self for rebirth. The darkness is fertile ground where new life quietly stirs. In embracing the shadow, the soul begins to reclaim its lost parts. It gathers the scattered fragments, weaving them into a tapestry of greater complexity and beauty. The shadow's gifts are paradoxical. It reveals both wounds and wisdom, chaos and order, suffering and healing. It is the dark mirror reflecting the true image of the self, beyond ego's illusion. This sacred dialogue is ongoing, a lifelong conversation between light and dark within the soul. It requires humility and patience, for the shadow resists easy understanding. It demands that we become both seeker and sanctuary, holding space for the wild and the wounded, the hidden and the revealed. The shadow's whispers are the call to deeper presence, to listen without judgment, to receive without resistance. They teach the soul to trust the inner process, to honor the slow alchemy of transformation unfolding beneath the surface. In this trust, the self finds a new kind of strength, one born not from control, but from surrender. As the shadow's voice grows clearer, the self begins to recognize its own complexity and mystery. It sees that wholeness is not perfection, but the embrace of all parts, light and dark, known and unknown, order and chaos. The shadow is the dark flame that burns away illusion and reveals the true gold within. In this sacred space of encounter, the soul awakens to its own wildness, its own sacred depth. It learns that darkness is not the absence of light, but its hidden face, a necessary partner in the dance of becoming. The shadow is the pulse of life beneath the surface, the keeper of the soul's most profound secrets. This awakening is the beginning of a new chapter in the inner journey, a chapter marked by deeper honesty, greater courage, and a more expansive sense of self. The shadow's whispers are a call to transformation, an invitation to step fully into the mystery of who we truly are. The journey into the shadow is the journey into the heart of the psyche, the sacred descent where old identities die and new selves are born. It is the sacred fire that ignites the soul's rebirth, the dark womb from which the light of wholeness emerges. To listen to the shadow is to listen to the soul's own wild, sacred voice. It is to become a pilgrim in the inner wilderness, guided by the silent whispers of transformation. This is the path of true individuation, the unfolding of the self beyond ego, beyond mask, beyond fear. Here, in this sacred dialogue, the soul finds its way home, not to the comfort of certainty, but to the mystery of becoming. The shadow's whispers are the sacred song of the depths, calling the self to awaken, to grow, to become whole. Behind the polished veneer of daily life, beneath the smiles and measured words, the persona dances, a shimmering mask worn to navigate the world's demanding stage. It is a carefully crafted fortress, forged in the fires of survival and shaped by the relentless expectations of society. Yet beneath this armor lies a fragile self, caught between the yearning for authenticity and the imperative to adapt. The persona is both shield and cage, a paradox that shelters the ego even as it distances the soul from its deepest truth. This mask is born of necessity, a response to the gaze of others, a role performed to gain acceptance, safety, and love. Like a chameleon blending into the shifting landscape, the persona molds itself to fit the roles demanded by family, culture, and circumstance. It is the echo of ancestral patterns and societal scripts woven with threads of fear and hope. To the untrained eye, it appears whole, even radiant. But this brilliance conceals a fragile core, a self that remains veiled and distant. The tension between authenticity and adaptation is the silent pulse beneath the persona's surface. It is the battleground where the ego wages war against the unruly depths of the unconscious. Here, the sacred self waits in quiet defiance, yearning to emerge beyond the constricting mask. The persona's solidity is an illusion, a delicate architecture balanced precariously between the demands of the outer world and the inner call of being. To unmask is to risk chaos, to step into the void where familiar identities dissolve and the unknown beckons. It is a terrifying descent into the shadow of the self, where certainty collapses and vulnerability reigns. The ego resists this dissolution, for in the breaking of the mask lies the death of old certainties and the birth, pangs of transformation. Yet within this collapse, the chrysalis of true identity begins to form. This chrysalis is a sacred container, a liminal space where the self sheds the skins that no longer serve. It is the dark cocoon where the soul can weave new patterns, free from the distortions of persona and illusion. The process is slow and often painful, like the breaking of a frozen lake beneath the spring sun. The ice cracks, shatters, and dissolves, revealing the life-giving water beneath, fluid, mysterious, alive. In this sacred unraveling, the self confronts the paradox of identity. To be true, one must embrace both the mask and what lies beneath it. The persona is not to be destroyed, but understood, integrated as a vital part of the psyche's architecture. It is a necessary costume for the dance of life, but one that must no longer obscure the soul's radiance. The task is to become conscious of the mask's presence and to allow the self, the deeper wholeness beyond ego, to shine through. This journey toward unmasking is an act of courage and trust. It requires the willingness to stand in the trembling silence of not knowing, to face the disorientation of losing familiar ground. Yet in this surrender, the self discovers a profound freedom, the freedom to be seen, not as the persona dictates, but as the true, multifaceted being beneath. This is the heart of individuation, the sacred unfolding of the self beyond the ego's limited gaze. The collapse of the persona is also an invitation to enantiodromia, the alchemical turning of opposites where chaos births order and fragmentation gives way to unity. In the breakdown of false identities, the psyche finds new patterns of coherence and meaning. The mask falls away, not into emptiness, but into the fertile ground of wholeness, where light and shadow mingle in sacred harmony. This sacred dance of mask and self echoes ancient myths of transformation: the hero who descends into darkness, the phoenix who burns to rise anew, the alchemist who dissolves to purify. Each symbolizes the process of breaking through illusion and stepping into the fullness of being. The persona's masquerade is the stage for this eternal drama, where the soul learns to play with its own reflection and, ultimately, to transcend it. To witness the persona's masquerade is to become a conscious actor in one's own life, no longer blind to the roles imposed by fear or habit. It is to see the mask not as a prison, but as a costume that can be chosen, changed, or discarded with intention. This awareness brings power, a power born not of control, but of presence, humility, and grace. The sacred self reveals itself slowly, like a dawn breaking through a long night. It emerges not by force, but through gentle patience and deep listening. The unmasking is a pilgrimage inward, a sacred journey into the labyrinth of the soul, where every step uncovers another layer of truth and mystery. In this journey, the soul learns the art of balance between concealment and revelation, between the need for connection and the call to solitude. The persona is both barrier and bridge, a threshold to cross on the way to self-realization. To walk this path is to honor the complexity of being human, to embrace the paradoxes that make us whole. The unmasking is not an event, but a process, a sacred unfolding that continues through the cycles of life. It is a constant negotiation between the self's yearning for freedom and the world's demands for conformity. Yet each moment of authenticity, each glimpse beyond the mask, is a step closer to the radiant core of the self. Here, in this liminal space between mask and truth, the soul finds its voice, clear, authentic, and unbound. The chrysalis cracks open, and the self begins to soar, not as a fragmented ego, but as a luminous whole, embraced in the dance of light and shadow, mask and essence, loss and rebirth. Beneath the hardened exterior we present to the world, beneath the armor forged in the fires of survival and tempered by the harshness of life, there lies a fragile and silent figure, the wounded child. This is not a child of flesh and bone alone, but an archetype embedded deep within the psyche, a sacred remnant of innocence and trauma intertwined. The wounded child is a spectral presence, an echo of early wounds that have seeped into the unconscious like slow-moving rivers, carving their channels beneath the surface of consciousness. This child's lament is often muffled by the demands of adulthood, the necessity to appear strong, to perform, to hide vulnerability in the shadows of shame or fear. Yet beneath this silence pulses a wellspring of feeling, a primal reservoir of longing, pain, and yearning that shapes the very foundation of our being. The wounds born here are not mere memories, but living imprints, psychic fissures that fragment the soul and cast long shadows over the landscape of our inner world. To hear this lament is to enter a sacred dialogue with the self's most vulnerable core. It is to listen with a heart unguarded, to meet the child not with judgment, but with profound compassion and tenderness. This encounter is the threshold of healing, a return to a time before the ego's defenses solidified, before the personas, masks obscured the rawness of experience. Here, in this liminal space, the wounded child waits patiently, beckoning the soul to remember, to grieve, and ultimately to be restored. The journey toward this inner child is both delicate and profound. It requires a descent into the depths of the unconscious, where the wounds lie hidden beneath layers of denial, repression, and dissociation. This descent is a sacred pilgrimage, reminiscent of the mythic hero's journey into the underworld, a place of darkness and mystery where death and rebirth unfold in eternal cycles. The wounded child is the guardian of this shadow realm, the keeper of unspoken pain and forgotten joy. As we listen to the child's lament, we begin to perceive the paradox of suffering and innocence entwined, how the deepest wounds can also be the doorway to the most profound transformation. The child's pain is a sacred flame, flickering in the darkness, illuminating the path toward wholeness. It is through this flame that the psyche begins the alchemical process of nigredo, the blackening or breaking down necessary for the emergence of new life. This process is not linear but cyclical, a dance of descent and ascent, unraveling and renewal. The wounded child's cry breaks the silence of the ego's fortress, unsettling old patterns and inviting the self to step forward. It is a call to integrate what was once fractured, to bring light into the shadows where pain was buried, and to reclaim the parts of the soul lost to trauma's cold grip. In the sacred space of this healing, time seems to fold, past and present intertwine, and the child's experience becomes ours once more. We are invited to hold this inner figure with reverence, to soothe its fears and cradle its tears. This is the work of the inner healer, the compassionate witness who stands beside the wounded child, offering presence where there was once absence, voice where there was silence. The lament is also a song of resilience, a testament to the child's enduring spirit. Though wounded, this archetype is not broken. It is alive with the potential for renewal and growth. It embodies the eternal hope that beneath pain lies the seed of new beginnings, that the soul can be reborn from the ashes of its past, whole and radiant. To embrace the wounded child is to acknowledge the shadow within ourselves, the parts we have rejected, feared, or forgotten. It is an act of profound courage and vulnerability, a surrender to the complexity of the human condition. This embrace dissolves the barrier between self and other, past and present, hurt and healing, revealing the interconnectedness of all parts of the psyche. In this sacred embrace, the wounded child's lament transforms from a cry of despair into a song of liberation. The soul learns to dance with its own shadow, to weave together the fractured threads of identity into a tapestry of wholeness. This is the heart of individuation, the sacred unfolding of the self through integration and reconciliation. The journey with the wounded child is a journey of love, a love that transcends time, a love that heals the deepest wounds by simply witnessing them. It is a journey that leads us beyond the confines of ego and persona, into the vast uncharted realms of the self, where true healing and transformation dwell. Here, in this sacred encounter, the soul finds its way back to its primal wellspring, source of innocence, creativity, and profound aliveness. The wounded child, once silent and forgotten, now sings its song with clarity and power, inviting us to join in the eternal dance of healing, becoming, and rebirth. In the quiet solitude of the soul's deepest chambers, there comes a call, a summons as old as myth itself, to descend into the vast and shadowed realm of the unconscious. This descent is no mere journey, but a sacred passage, a mythic voyage reminiscent of Orpheus stepping into Hades' cold embrace, where light and darkness weave an eternal dance. To descend is to surrender the ego's certainty, to dissolve the familiar borders of identity, and to venture into the unknown depths where the soul's raw material lies waiting. Here, beneath the surface of conscious thought, the shadow stirs, a protean force of forgotten memories, repressed fears, and hidden truths that refuse to be silenced. This is the realm where the self's fragmented pieces lie scattered like ancient relics, where the chrysalis of transformation quietly pulses beneath a veil of darkness. To meet the unconscious is to encounter both terror and tenderness, the terrifying vastness of the abyss and the nurturing soil from which the seed of the self will grow. The descent is a symbolic death, a relinquishing of the ego's brittle grasp on control and definition. Like the alchemical nigredo, it is the blackening, the unraveling of old forms so new ones may emerge. The ego dissolves into shadow and silence, and in this void, the sacred paradox is revealed. Death is the birthplace of life, darkness, the womb of light. The soul's journey inward is a crucible where the raw ore of unconscious material is refined through fire and shadow. Each step down into the unconscious is a step away from the known and a step toward the mysterious heart of being. It is a crossing of thresholds where time folds and mythic symbols arise spontaneously, like the descent of the hero into the underworld or the spiraling journey of the serpent shedding its skin. In this place, archetypes speak through dreams, visions, and symbols, guiding the soul toward deeper understanding. The fears encountered here are ancient, primordial, ghosts of ancestral wounds and personal traumas that have been buried beneath. Layers of denial, yet to face them is to reclaim the power they hold over us. The unconscious, far from being a hostile void, is a wellspring of life and creativity, a vast ocean where opposites merge, and the enantiodromia, the turning of opposites, into each other, begins to unfold. This alchemical process is both terrifying and ecstatic. The ego's death is experienced as loss and dissolution, but also as liberation, a liberation from the shackles of false selfhood and the masks we have worn. It is here, in the liminal space between life and death, light and shadow, that the self reveals itself in flickers, like the first flame sparked from dry tinder. The sacred descent is not a journey of annihilation, but of transformation and rebirth. The soul sinks into the abyss to gather the scattered fragments of its being, to integrate the shadow's gifts, and to emerge whole. Like Orpheus, who journeyed to reclaim Eurydice, the soul must tread carefully, carrying the light of consciousness through the darkness, trusting the inner guide even when the way is uncertain. In this underworld of the psyche, the familiar dissolves, and the soul is invited to embrace paradox and ambiguity. It learns that the shadow is not merely an enemy to be defeated, but a teacher, a keeper of hidden wisdom that the conscious mind cannot grasp alone. The unconscious speaks in symbols and images, weaving a tapestry of meaning beyond the linear mind's reach. This descent also reveals the eternal cycle of symbolic death and rebirth, each plunge into darkness, followed by an ascent into new light, each collapse leading to a chrysalis phase, where transformation ripens unseen. It is the rhythm of the psyche's growth, the sacred dance of individuation unfolding in time and soul. To descend is to trust the unknown, to allow oneself to be swallowed by silence and shadow, knowing that the self waits patiently in the depths. It is a surrender to mystery, a letting go of control, and a deepening into the sacred aloneness where the soul's true nature whispers its secrets. In this sacred underworld, the soul gathers its strength, weaving together the threads of shadow and light, memory and dream, fear and hope. The descent becomes a pilgrimage of the spirit, an initiation into the mysteries of the self, where death becomes a threshold and darkness a path toward illumination. This journey inward is not for the faint of heart, yet it is the path of the true seeker. The soul courageous enough to face its own depths, to embrace the paradoxes within, and to emerge transformed. For in the depths, beneath the surface of everyday consciousness, the self waits, waiting to be born anew from the sacred darkness of the unconscious. In the sacred forge of the psyche, there comes a time when the soul is consumed by a fire unlike any other, a blackening fire known to the alchemists as nigredo. This is the dark night of the soul, a profound descent into chaos, where the familiar shapes of identity dissolve into shadow and ash. It is not merely darkness as absence, but a living, breathing darkness that envelops the spirit in its crucible, demanding surrender to the unraveling of all that once was certain. The ego, that fragile edifice built on illusion and persona, begins to crack and crumble beneath the relentless flame. Its protective walls, once steadfast and proud, become brittle and fall away, exposing the raw and tender self beneath. Here, in this abyss, the soul experiences its symbolic death, the blackening, the rotting, the decay, necessary for the alchemical process of transformation. Yet within this profound collapse lies the paradox of renewal. The nigredo is not an end, but a threshold, a liminal space where the old dies so that the new may be born. It is the sacred fire that burns away falsehood, pride, and attachment, clearing the ground for the emergence of the self in its deepest truth. Though the night feels endless and the silence thick with despair, it carries the unseen seed of rebirth waiting patiently to sprout in the fertile ashes. This stage is a mirror to the soul's hidden wounds, those buried traumas and shadows, long denied or disowned. The black fire stokes the pain and suffering, demanding recognition and integration. It is a fierce and tender teacher, forcing the psyche to confront its shadow not as enemy, but as the dark mother of transformation, where destruction and creation dance in eternal embrace. In this crucible, the soul learns the language of paradox, life through death, light through darkness, wholeness through fragmentation. The nigredo strips away the ego's masks, its illusions of control and certainty, and reveals the naked truth of our human vulnerability and infinite potential. It is the dissolution of form, the breaking down of old patterns, and the surrender to the unknown depths of the unconscious. The imagery of nightfall is apt here. The thick velvet darkness that blankets the soul, a silence so profound it seems to swallow all sound and hope. Yet just as the night is necessary for the stars to appear, so too does the nigredo prepare the soul to receive its inner light. It is the black earth in which the chrysalis of transformation takes root, unseen and mysterious, gathering strength for the emergence to come. Within this darkness the soul may feel lost, abandoned, or broken. But the alchemical wisdom whispers that this is the sacred void, the fertile nothingness from which the self will rise like a phoenix. The nigredo calls for patience, compassion, and trust in the slow, mysterious rhythms of inner growth. This stage is a confrontation with the shadow in its deepest form, the chaos, the pain, the despair that often leads us to the brink of surrender. It is a night of symbolic death that every seeker must walk through, where the ego's dissolution is not defeat, but a necessary passage toward wholeness. The darkness is not absence, but a matrix of potential, a primordial womb holding the promise of dawn. The blackening fire transforms the soul, burning away the dross and falsehoods, revealing the core essence of the self, untouched and eternal. It is the soul's purification by fire, a ritual of unmaking that prepares the way for the sacred art of remaking. To embrace the nigredo is to embrace the mystery of life's shadow side, the hidden depths where transformation takes root in silence and solitude. It is the soul's sacred collapse, a surrender to the sacred aloneness where the self waits patiently, ready to be born anew from the ashes of the old. In the stillness of retreat, the soul turns inward, stepping away from the cacophony of a world to find sanctuary in solitude. Like the ancient hermit who withdraws into the cave, the psyche seeks a refuge where the outer distractions fade into silence and the deep murmurs of the self begin to emerge from the shadows. This inward journey is no mere escape, but a necessary pilgrimage to the sanctuary where true wisdom is born, not in noise or haste, but in the quiet unraveling of the ego's grasp. The hermit's cave, a timeless symbol, stands as both refuge and threshold, an enclosure that holds the tension between darkness and light, silence and revelation. Within its depths, the ego's armor softens, its rigid contours melting away like morning mist, revealing the contours of a more subtle presence. Beneath, this presence is the self, in its whispering voice, ancient and eternal, calling softly from the hidden chambers of the unconscious. To retreat is not to flee, but to enter the sacred chamber of becoming. The outer world, with its demands and distractions, recedes like a distant storm, leaving a profound stillness that invites the soul to listen deeply. Here, in the hermit's sanctuary, the noise of the persona's masquerade falls silent, and the soul's true face can be glimpsed in the flickering light of inner knowing. This withdrawal is a paradox, both a turning away and a turning toward. It is a descent into solitude that paradoxically connects us to the collective silence beneath all things. Like the archetype of the wise old man or the crone, the hermit embodies the principle of inner guidance, a beacon that illuminates the path not with outward light but with the glow of inner truth. The silence in the cave is not emptiness, but fullness. It holds the mystery of the self undivided, the ground from which new understanding sprouts like fragile shoots breaking through winter's frost. It is in this stillness that the soul confronts its own depths, encountering shadows and sparks of light intertwined, a liminal space where healing and insight arise together. The hermit's journey is an essential passage in the individuation. In process, it requires courage to sit with oneself in the dark, to face the chasms within where fear, longing, and forgotten dreams reside. Yet it is precisely in this courageous stillness that the soul begins to hear the soft voice of the self, guiding beyond the ego's illusions and the persona's masks. In this sacred solitude, time itself seems to dissolve. The linear rhythms of day and night give way to a timeless presence, where moments stretch and contract like breath. The soul becomes aware of its own depth, a wellspring that neither rushes nor falters, a silent ocean beneath the turbulent waves of consciousness. This retreat into the hermit's sanctuary also holds a social dimension, hidden beneath its solitude. It's the space where the soul gathers its strength before returning to the world, not as fragmented or defensive, but as a whole being carrying the light of inner wisdom. The hermit does not remain isolated forever. The sanctuary is a place of preparation, a sacred pause before the next emergence. Symbolically, the cave itself is a womb of transformation. Like the mythic caves where heroes descend to face trials and return reborn, the hermit's sanctuary holds the potential for deep psychic renewal. It is the place where the soul surrenders to silence, allowing the unconscious to breathe and speak in images, symbols, and dreams. Within this sacred space, the polarity between solitude and communion dissolves. The hermit is never truly alone, for the self is the silent companion, the inner guide whose whispers carry the echoes of universal wisdom. This communion beyond words fosters a profound sense of belonging, not to outer groups or roles, but to the eternal mystery that animates life itself. To enter the hermit's cave is to embrace a paradox of presence and absence, speech and silence, light and shadow. It is to learn the language of the soul, where meaning unfolds in stillness and the heart listens with ancient ears. Here, the ego's need to control and define fades, replaced by a surrender to the unfolding mystery of the self. The hermits. Sanctuary teaches that wisdom is not grasped by force, but received in humility and patience. It invites the soul to trust the slow alchemy of inner transformation, to honor the rhythms of darkness and light, and to find in silence the profound song of being. This sacred withdrawal is the foundation of rebirth. Like a seed buried deep in winter soil, the soul gathers strength unseen, preparing for the spring emergence where the self will shine forth in fuller light. The hermit's journey is a reminder that true power arises from the depths of stillness, that the greatest truths often come whispered from the quiet heart of solitude. Thus, the soul learns that retreat is not defeat, but a sacred strategy, a deliberate turning inward to recover the self, to listen beyond the noise, and to dwell in the sanctuary where transformation is nurtured in silence. In this refuge, the ego dissolves, and the soul begins to remember itself as whole, radiant, and free. Within the boundless theater of the psyche, a profound dance unfolds, a swirling, ancient rhythm where opposites collide and embrace, weaving a sacred tension that animates the depths of the soul. This is enantiodromia, the turning of opposites, the eternal return of what was once repressed now rising to meet its shadowed counterpart. It is the cosmic pulse beating beneath the surface, where light and darkness entwine in a paradoxical embrace, birthing a transformative alchemy within the inner world. Imagine for a moment the delicate balance of day surrendering to night, the sun fading beyond the horizon, as the moon awakens in quiet luminescence. Neither conqueror nor conquered, they exist in a dance of reciprocity, each defining and shaping the other. So too in the psyche, masculine and feminine, order and chaos, conscious and unconscious, engage in an endless interplay, each necessary, each incomplete without the other. This dance of opposites reveals the paradoxical heart of the self, unity that transcends duality, yet contains it within its wholeness. Carl Jung taught us that the ego, with its desire for control and certainty, often resists this interplay, fearing dissolution into contradiction. Yet it is precisely by embracing this tension, by allowing the shadow to speak and the anima, or animus, to awaken, that the soul moves toward true individuation. Enantiodromia is not a gentle reconciliation, but a dynamic upheaval, a necessary upheaval, where the rigid boundaries of the persona begin to crumble. It is the sudden flood that sweeps away the ego's illusions of separateness, revealing the luminous undercurrent of connectedness beneath. In this sacred turmoil, the psyche experiences symbolic death and rebirth. The old self disintegrates, giving way to the emergence of a more integrated, fluid identity. Consider the myth of the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail, a timeless symbol of cyclic return and wholeness. This eternal loop embodies the essence of enantiodromia. The end is always a beginning, and the shadow's descent births the light anew. The self is not a fixed point, but a living process, ever turning, ever balancing like the pendulum swinging. Between extremes, never resting, but always moving toward equilibrium. In the midst of this turning, the soul encounters paradox after paradox. Strength through vulnerability, freedom through surrender, unity through differentiation. These spiritual truths resist logical resolution, inviting us instead into a contemplative space where opposites coexist in tension, fostering a fertile ground for creative energy to arise. The tension between masculine and feminine within the psyche is one of the most profound manifestations of this dance. The masculine principle, often aligned with order, logic, and assertion, meets the feminine principle, associated with chaos, intuition, and receptivity. Individuation requires the conscious weaving together of these polarities, not as a conquest of one by the other, but as a sacred marriage where each complements and elevates the whole. This union is not without conflict. The ego fears losing itself in the unfamiliar rhythms of the unconscious feminine or masculine, clinging to familiar roles and identities. Yet the psyche calls us toward balance, to step beyond the safety of polarity into the liminal space where transformation ripens. Here, in this fertile tension, the soul learns to hold contradictions without collapse, embracing complexity as the source of wisdom. Enantiodromia also speaks to the relationship between order and chaos. Life itself is a dance between these forces. Structure emerges from the void, only to dissolve again into potential. The ego's impulse to impose order often meets resistance from the chaotic unconscious, which challenges our neat boundaries and safe illusions. To journey inward is to surrender to this dance, to trust the cycle of disintegration and renewal, death and rebirth. This sacred rhythm echoes the seasons, the tides, the heartbeat, natural cycles reminding us that opposites are not enemies but partners in the creative unfolding of life. The soul, in learning this dance, discovers that wholeness is not a static state but a dynamic balance, an ongoing process of becoming. The paradox deepens as the self reveals itself not as a simple harmony but as a complex unity, holding shadow and light, masculine and feminine, order and chaos in a living tension that sustains vitality. In this realization, the soul recognizes that wholeness transcends duality. It contains the mystery that both divides and unites, fractures and heals. The dance of enantiodromia calls the soul to courage, courage to face the shadow's depths, to accept the feminine's mystery, to embrace chaos's wildness without fear. It invites a surrender that is not defeat but profound empowerment, a recognition that in the paradox of opposites lies the wellspring of creativity and spiritual vitality. As the soul learns to flow with this turning, it becomes a living bridge between worlds, between light and darkness, self and other, finite and infinite. The ego's need for control softens into trust, and the self speaks in symbols, dreams, and subtle intimations that guide the way beyond the false certainty of separateness. Enantiodromia is the great mystery of the psyche's journey, an eternal spiral, a sacred dance where opposites meet, clash, and ultimately embrace. It is the path where the soul sheds fragmentation and steps into the radiant paradox of wholeness, becoming a vessel for the creative pulse of life itself. This turning of opposites, this dance of shadow and light, beckons us to surrender our rigid identities and to discover the freedom that arises when we no longer resist the natural flow of transformation. The soul, in this embrace, learns that the deepest harmony is born in the tension of contradiction, and that within this sacred dance lies the promise of rebirth, renewal, and the unfolding of the self. Beneath the quiet surface of waking consciousness lies a vast realm, a shadowy expanse where images, symbols, and whispers dwell beyond the reach of everyday thought. Here, the sacred dialogue unfolds, the meeting place between conscious awareness and the depths of the unconscious. It is a communion of opposites, a silent conversation that breathes life into the soul's yearning for wholeness. Imagine the moment when twilight softens the edge between day and night, and the sky becomes a canvas for stars to emerge. Silent, luminous messengers from the depths of darkness. So too, the unconscious speaks to the conscious through dreams, myths, and archetypal visions, offering a language beyond words. This language is not linear or literal, but poetic and symbolic, inviting the soul to listen with a heart unguarded, to receive rather than control. Carl Jung taught us that these symbols are not mere fantasies, but autonomous expressions of the self, arising spontaneously to guide, warn, and heal. They are the psyche's sacred messengers, appearing in dreams like ancient messengers cloaked in mythic garb, carrying messages that elude rational grasp. To engage this dialogue is to step into a liminal space where mystery is not feared, but revered, where silence itself becomes a sacred voice. The conscious ego, with its thirst for clarity and certainty, often resists this descent into mystery. It seeks control, explanation, mastery. Yet the unconscious invites surrender, a softening into paradox, a willingness to dwell in ambiguity. This tension between control and surrender is itself a dance, a necessary passage in the journey of individuation. The ego must learn humility before the vastness of the unknown, to listen rather than dictate, to receive rather than resist. This sacred dialogue unfolds most vividly in dreams, the nightly theatre of the soul's unfolding story. Dreams speak in symbols, water, fire, labyrinths, serpents, archetypal figures, each a portal into the hidden chambers of the psyche. The dreamer becomes both witness and participant in an unfolding drama that reveals the soul's current state, its wounds, its longings, and its potential. In this encounter, the unconscious is not a distant stranger but a wise guide, revealing the shadow's contents, the neglected parts of the self longing for integration. The dream's images may shock or confuse, yet beneath their surface lies a call toward transformation, a symbolic death and rebirth that prepares the ego for the unfolding self. Myth, too, serves as a sacred dialogue, a shared language across cultures and time, carrying the archetypal patterns that shape human experience. The hero's journey, the descent into the underworld, the union of divine lovers, these stories resonate within the collective unconscious, echoing the soul's own passage through darkness toward light. To enter this dialogue is to recognize oneself as part of a larger cosmic drama, where personal suffering and triumph reflect universal themes. The archetypes emerge not as fixed roles, but as living energies, animus and anima, shadow and wise old man, trickster and mother, each inviting us to deepen our understanding of who we are beyond the ego's mask. The sacred dialogue also unfolds in moments of silence and stillness, when the ego withdraws and the self begins to speak in subtle whispers. Here the inner guide reveals truths not through words, but through presence, an ineffable knowing that transcends language. This is the sanctuary where trust takes root, where surrender is met with grace, and where the soul's deepest healing begins. Trust is the foundation of this encounter. To listen with humility requires courage, to face the unknown without defense, to embrace paradox without the need for immediate resolution. It is in this openness that the soul receives the transformative fire of the self, burning away illusions and illuminating the path forward. Surrender does not mean defeat, but a sacred yielding, an active participation in the alchemy of the psyche. Through this yielding, the ego expands, loosens its grip on fixed identity, and allows the self to emerge with greater clarity and strength. This process is never linear. It unfolds in spirals, cycles of descent and ascent, darkness and light. Dialogue between conscious and unconscious is thus an eternal rhythm, a living mystery where silence and symbol, light and shadow, speak in a language of the soul. It is a call to awaken to the fullness of being, to hear the voice of the inner guide that transcends fear and illusion. As the soul learns to dance in this sacred dialogue, it discovers that transformation is less about conquering the darkness and more about befriending it. The shadow is not the enemy but a hidden treasure, waiting to be acknowledged and embraced. The unconscious is not chaos, but a wellspring of wisdom, guiding the soul toward integration and wholeness. In this meeting, the boundaries between self and other dissolve, and the soul glimpses its place within the great mystery, a mystery that cannot be contained by words, but lives in the silent spaces between them. Here the sacred dialogue continues, an endless unfolding, a divine conversation between the finite and the infinite. To embark on this journey is to enter a sanctuary within, where the soul's longing finds voice in symbol and silence. It is an invitation to listen deeply, to trust the unknown, and to allow the transformative power of the self to awaken the soul's dormant light. This sacred dialogue is the heart of the individuation process, the path where the fragmented ego meets the whole self, where personal history merges with timeless myth, and where the soul is reborn into a fuller, richer life. In the end, the dialogue teaches us that the soul's greatest wisdom lies not in answers, but in the humble, loving act of listening, the profound stillness where mystery and meaning intertwine and transformation is born, from the depths where darkness once reigned, where the ego's old forms lay shattered and scattered like fragile bones in the wind, there emerges a silent fire, a flame born not of destruction alone, but of sacred renewal. This is the moment of the phoenix, the eternal symbol of rebirth, rising from the ashes of psychic death with wings radiant in the dawn's first light. The soul, having journeyed through the crucible of shadow and silence, now stirs toward a new becoming, tempered by the trials endured and transfigured by the fire that once threatened to consume. In this alchemical rebirth, we witness the unfolding of the future self, the self as yet unknown, shimmering at the horizon of consciousness like a distant star calling through the night. It is a luminous promise whispered in the language of transformation, where death is not an end, but a necessary surrender to the flow of life's deeper mystery. The ego's rigidity melts away, making room for a fluid identity that embraces paradox and shadow alike, weaving them into the tapestry of wholeness. The phoenix does not rise unscathed. It carries the scars of the fire, the wounds and fractures of the old self that burned away. Yet in these marks lies profound beauty, for they are the sigils of endurance, the etchings of a soul that dared to face its darkness and emerge anew. This sacred flame is both destroyer and creator, a paradoxical force that annihilates what is no longer needed, while birthing the seeds of infinite potential. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as this very process, a symbolic death and resurrection, where the fragmented ego dissolves into the greater unity of the self. The phoenix's flight embodies this journey, an ascent from the depths of Nigredo, the black night of the soul, through albedo, the cleansing light, toward rubedo, the radiant red of integration and wholeness. Each stage marks a step deeper into the labyrinth of the unconscious, and each rise a triumph of spirit over dissolution. To witness the phoenix arise within oneself is to encounter the sacred paradox of life's eternal dance, death and life, intertwined in an endless spiral. This is the enantiodromia of the soul, where opposites merge and transform, where the shadow's cold embrace yields to the warm light of renewal. It is a journey that demands courage, for to be reborn, one must first surrender all that is known, to plunge willingly into the unknown depths. Within the ashes, the soul finds a fertile ground, black soil rich with the nutrients of experience and suffering. Here, the seeds of the future self are planted, nourished by the wisdom of shadow and the silent whispers of the unconscious. The phoenix's rebirth is not a return to innocence, but an emergence into a higher state of consciousness, one that carries the fullness of past trials as the foundation for greater freedom. This renewal is also an embrace of paradox, the coexistence of vulnerability and strength, of light and darkness, of death and rebirth. The soul learns to hold these tensions without collapse, cultivating an inner sanctuary where all parts of the self are honored and integrated. The radiant light of the phoenix shines brightest in this space of wholeness, illuminating the path ahead with clarity and grace. In myth, the phoenix's cycle is eternal, a timeless reminder that the soul's journey is never linear, but a spiral dance through transformation. Each death is a portal to new life, each ending a threshold to beginnings unforeseen. The soul, in its deepest essence, is a vessel of this sacred fire, an ever-burning flame that guides through shadow, silence, and renewal. The emergence of the future self is marked not by perfection, but by authenticity, a being who no longer wears the mask of the persona, but stands unveiled, radiant in the raw truth of existence. This self is a warrior and a healer, a lover and a sage, united in the complex dance of opposites. It carries the scars of the past as sacred badges and moves forward with an open heart and unwavering spirit. To embody the phoenix is to embody resilience, to understand that true transformation is born not from avoidance of suffering, but from the courageous embrace of it. The soul's fire burns away illusion, revealing the core of being beneath, the indestructible essence that cannot be touched by fear or loss. In this fire, the soul is refined, purified, and set free. The journey to this rebirth is often solitary, a descent into the depths where the ego's noise falls silent, and the self begins to speak through symbols, dreams, and the quiet voice of intuition. It is here that the soul learns to trust the inner flame, to follow its flicker through the darkest nights and uncertain dawns. The phoenix's flight is a testament to this trust, a soaring into the unknown, carried by the wings of faith and inner knowing. As the phoenix rises, so too does the soul awaken to its infinite potential, liberated from the confines of past identity and fear. This liberation is not an escape, but a homecoming, a return to the sacred center where the wholeness of being is revealed in all its complexity and beauty. The soul, reborn from ashes, shines as a beacon of hope and transformation for itself and others. In this sacred moment, the soul understands that rebirth is an ongoing process, a continuous unfolding where endings and beginnings intertwine. The phoenix reminds us that within every death lies the seed of new life, and within every darkness the promise of dawn. The soul's capacity to endure and transform is limitless, a radiant testament to the profound mystery of existence. Thus, from the ashes of psychic death, the phoenix arises, an eternal flame illuminating the path of individuation, guiding the soul toward ever greater freedom, light, and love. This is the sacred dance of transformation, the heartbeat of the self's eternal becoming. In the quiet breath between past and future, the soul stands as a living thread woven through the tapestry of ancestral time. Beneath the surface of individual memory, beneath the veils of conscious thought, lies the vast, uncharted sea of the collective unconscious, a boundless reservoir where the echoes of ancestors reside, whispering their ancient wisdom through the corridors of the soul. To walk forward into the future self is not simply to move beyond the self, but to carry the weight and grace of countless generations, the legacy of ancestors whose silent strength has shaped the very contours of our being. This legacy is no mere history. It is a living presence, a spectral dance of spirits who traverse the unseen realms between worlds. They are the guardians of a sacred trust, keepers of secrets encoded in the deep unconscious, transmitted like a slow-burning flame, from soul to soul. Within this inheritance, the pain of suffering and the triumph of survival intermingle, forming a crucible where healing begins. Healing that transcends the boundaries of the individual, flowing outward to mend the fractures of collective wounds. To engage with the ancestors is to hear a voice older than language, a voice that speaks in symbols, dreams, and mythic forms. It is the language of roots that run beneath the earth, deep and unseen, nourishing the seed of the future self. This voice calls not with demand, but with invitation, a beckoning toward conscious becoming that honors the sacrifices and struggles etched into the flesh and spirit of those who came before. Their stories are not burdens, but gifts, offerings, of strength, resilience, and wisdom that the soul may carry forward in the journey toward wholeness. Carl Jung's vision of the collective unconscious reveals that we are never truly alone in our transformations. The shadow we wrestle with, the persona we wear, the ego we seek to transcend, these are threads interlaced with ancestral echoes. The unresolved grief, the inherited fears, the unspoken hopes of forebears rest within us, calling for acknowledgement and integration. The individuation process becomes a sacred dialogue not only with the self, but with the ancestral lineage, a reconciliation that honors both personal and collective depths. In this sacred dialogue, the soul becomes a vessel of memory and promise, a bridge between what was and what may yet be. The ancestors are the silent chorus beneath the soul's unfolding song, their voices rising in harmony with the present self's awakening. To acknowledge them is to step into a deeper lineage of purpose, a path where healing is not isolated, but shared, a communal river flowing through time and space. This interplay of personal and collective unconscious reveals the paradox of individuation. To become wholly oneself, one must also become wholly part of the greater whole. The ego's quest for autonomy finds its true meaning in surrender to the ancestral flow, in recognizing that the roots of the self stretch far beyond the skin, reaching into the fertile soil of shared human experience. The future self is thus a constellation of many stars, each an ancestor, a memory, a lesson, burning brightly in the night sky of the soul. The legacy of the ancestors is also a call to responsibility, a summons to carry forward the healing that many could not complete. It asks us to hold the wounds of the past with compassion and courage, to transform inherited pain into the wisdom that liberates. In this sacred work, the soul becomes an alchemist, transmuting lead into gold, suffering into insight, fragmentation into unity. Within this sacred inheritance lies the profound truth of enantiodromia, the turning of opposites, where personal shadow meets collective shadow, and through their embrace new light is born. The soul's journey into conscious becoming is thus a dance with ancestors, a weaving of light and dark threads into a tapestry of meaning that honors all facets of existence. The metaphor of the tree is fitting here, a mighty oak whose branches reach toward the heavens while its roots delve deep into the earth. The tree is the soul, nourished by the waters of ancestral memory, sustained by the earth of collective experience. To heal the self is to tend these roots, to honor the lineage that supports growth and transformation. Each ring within the trunk marks a cycle of death and rebirth, an ongoing dialogue between past and present. The ancestors are not distant ghosts, but living presences within the psyche. They appear in dreams, in moments of intuition, in the sudden stirring of emotions that seem to come from nowhere. Their wisdom often arrives disguised in symbols, a raven's call, a flowing river, a mountain's silent strength, reminding the soul of its place within the vast web of life and time. Healing in this context becomes a sacred act of reciprocity. The soul receives the gifts of ancestral courage and resilience, and in return, it offers back the flowering of consciousness, an awakening that honors the past while creating space for future generations. This cyclical flow of giving and receiving is the heartbeat of legacy, the pulse that carries the soul forward on its journey. The future self, emerging from this dialogue, is not a solitary hero, but a participant in an ancient covenant, a living testament to the power of connection across time. It carries within it the hopes and dreams of ancestors whose voices were silenced, the unfulfilled destinies that now find expression in conscious becoming. This is the great mystery of transformation, that in embracing the lineage of shadows and light, the soul transcends limitation and steps into a realm of profound freedom and purpose. In the silence of the inner sanctuary, the soul listens deeply to this ancestral call, sensing the invisible hands that guide, support, and heal. This listening is an act of humility and trust, a surrender to the wisdom that flows through generations, a recognition that the journey toward wholeness is both individual and communal. Thus, the legacy of the ancestors unfolds as a sacred gift, an inheritance of strength and healing that empowers the soul's rebirth. It is a reminder that no transformation occurs in isolation, that the self is always interwoven with the collective tapestry of human experience. To walk this path is to honor the past, embrace the present, and courageously step into the unfolding future. In the vast theater of the psyche, where shadows and light weave their eternal dance, the soul moves with a rhythm both ancient and ever new. This dance of integration is no hurried step, no frantic chase toward completion, but a sacred unfolding, a weaving together of the fractured and whole, the shadow and the radiant, the pain that cleaves and the joy that binds. Here the soul learns the art of holding contradictions as a master weaver holds fragile threads with tenderness and unwavering attention. Individuation, that sacred journey Carl Jung spoke of, is not a destination fixed like a star in the night sky, but a living choreography, a pulsation between opposites, a reconciliation that never ceases but deepens with time. It is the ongoing meeting of the ego's striving and the self's whisper, the persona's mask and the shadow's unveiling, the known and the mysterious unknown that lies beneath. To walk this path is to enter a dance of paradox, where embracing the tension between light and dark becomes the very pulse of life. Imagine the soul as a river, flowing through landscapes both familiar and strange, gathering the waters of joy and sorrow, clarity and confusion. These currents, seemingly opposed, merge and mingle, carving a path that is uniquely your own. The fragmented parts of the psyche, those shards of the shadow once hidden or rejected, are not obstacles to be destroyed, but sacred pieces to be gathered, honored, and woven into the tapestry of wholeness. This integration is a dance of paradox, where opposites entwine and reveal the deeper harmony within. It is the phoenix's fire burning away illusion, yet tender enough to warm the fragile seed of new growth. It is the chrysalis cracking open, both a painful rupture and a miraculous birth. In this sacred movement, the soul learns to hold its own contradictions with compassion, not as enemies to be vanquished, but as teachers whose presence illuminates the path to deeper freedom. The inner guide, the wise narrator of this journey, invites you to feel the sacred tension as a creative force. The psyche's enantiodromia, the turning of opposites, reveals that within the darkest shadow resides the seed of light, and within the brightest light, the shadow's depth. This dynamic interplay propels the soul forward, spiraling ever inward and outward, peeling back layers of persona to reveal the radiant core of the self. In this dance, silence and sound merge. The quiet moments between breaths become sacred. Pauses where the soul listens deeply to the whisper of the unconscious, to the ancient songs of archetypes, to the gentle pulse of the self. Here, transformation unfolds not as a grand event, but as a series of subtle shifts, like the gradual dawn breaking through night's embrace. The metaphor of the labyrinth emerges as the perfect symbol for this dance, a winding path with many turns, dead ends, and unexpected openings. To journey inward through the labyrinth is to encounter shadows lurking in the corners, to face fears and desires, and to discover the hidden sanctuary at its center. Each step in the labyrinth is a movement in the dance of integration, sometimes hesitant, sometimes bold, but always unfolding in trust and surrender. The dance honors the sacred rhythm of death and rebirth that pulses through the psyche. The ego must often experience symbolic death, its rigid structures dismantled by the shadow's truth, before the self can rise renewed, more whole, more vibrant. This descent into darkness and the subsequent ascent into light are not linear but spiral, weaving together the threads of experience into a living fabric of meaning. As the soul embraces this sacred dance, it learns the art of compassion, not only toward others, but toward itself. The fragmented parts are met with kindness, the wounds are held tenderly, and the contradictions are seen as expressions of the soul's complexity and depth. This compassion becomes the balm that soothes the ache of separation and fosters the growth of unity. The dance of integration is also a dance with time, an acknowledgement that wholeness is not a fixed point to be attained, but a continual unfolding. Like the seasons that cycle through death and renewal, the psyche moves through phases of contraction and expansion, shadow and light, solitude and communion. Each phase offers new gifts, new insights, new steps in the sacred choreography of becoming. In this unfolding, the soul comes to recognize that the self is not a distant ideal, but a living presence, an inner flame that burns steadily beneath the surface of changing moods and shifting identities. This flame guides the dance, illuminating the path through darkness and uncertainty, reminding the soul that it is always held within the greater mystery of existence. The sacred dance is also an invitation to embrace the paradox of control and surrender. The ego's desire for mastery must meet the humility of surrendering to the unknown depths within. In this meeting, the soul finds its true strength, not in rigid control, but in flexible openness, not in certainty, but in courageous trust. Each moment in this dance is an opportunity for transformation. The shadows that once haunted become companions. The fears that once paralyzed become sources of courage. The fragmented self, once scattered and lost, begins to coalesce into a mosaic of meaning, a living testament to the soul's resilience and grace. This dance is ultimately a sacred conversation, a dialogue between the many parts of the psyche, between the temporal self and the eternal self, between human limitation and divine possibility. It is a conversation that holds space for mystery, honors paradox, and celebrates the profound alchemy of inner transformation. As the soul moves through this dance, it becomes a living symbol of the eternal human journey, a journey marked by falling and rising, losing and finding, dying and being reborn. Each step in this sacred choreography brings the soul closer to the radiant wholeness that lies at the heart of individuation, the luminous integration of shadow and light, of pain and joy, of death and rebirth. In this dance, the soul learns the ultimate truth, that to be whole is not to be perfect or fixed, but to be fully alive, embracing the fullness of existence with an open heart and a steady gaze. The dance of integration is the dance of life itself, a sacred weaving of all that we are into a tapestry of meaning, purpose, and grace. From the depths where shadows once whispered in silence, the self now rises, no longer hidden behind the masks of persona, no longer ensnared in the tangled web of shadow's concealment. It emerges as a luminous presence, radiant and still, a beacon of timeless being that transcends the ephemeral dramas of ego and illusion. This is the sacred self awakened, the eternal beginning that blooms at the threshold of all endings. Imagine the soul as a vast sky, sometimes veiled in storm clouds, sometimes bursting forth with the golden light of dawn. The journey to this awakening is the unfolding of that sky's true nature, where the storms of conflict and confusion give way to a serene clarity that knows no boundaries. The self is not a distant ideal or a far-off dream. It is the ever-present source beneath the waves of thought, the deep wellspring of life itself. In this final awakening, the soul has traversed the labyrinth of inner darkness and light, has danced the sacred dance of integration, and has borne the alchemical fire of symbolic death and rebirth. Each step, each trial, each encounter with shadow and light has carved away the layers of illusion, revealing the core of being, an essence untouched by time, suffering, or change. The persona, once a protective mask fashioned to meet the world's demands, now softens and dissolves, no longer needed as a shield or a veil. It is recognized as a necessary shapeshifter in the journey, but one that must yield to the greater truth of the self. This liberation from persona's grip is not loss but gain, the gift of authenticity, the freedom to be whole without apology or defense. The shadow, once feared and hidden deep within the unconscious, is embraced in tender acknowledgement. Its darkness is not eradicated but transformed, recognized as the wellspring of vitality, creativity, and profound wisdom. The integration of shadow does not erase its mystery, but honors its vital role as a teacher and companion on the path toward wholeness. This awakening is a flowering, an opening of the soul's inner landscape into the boundless horizon of possibility. Like the lotus that rises pure from the muddy waters, the sacred self blooms amid the complexities of life, radiant with grace and unshakable presence. It is both deeply rooted and expansively free, a paradox that carries the soul beyond duality into the seamless unity of being. The eternal beginning of this awakening is not a conclusion, but an invitation, a call to continue the mythic pilgrimage, that each soul must walk in its own unique way. The path does not end here. It unfolds endlessly, a sacred journey through ever-deepening layers of consciousness and love. In this luminous presence, time itself becomes fluid, a river flowing, without beginning or end. Past and future dissolve into the eternal now, where the self dwells in radiant awareness. This awareness is not a passive state, but a vibrant aliveness, a dance of presence that engages with life in all its mystery and wonder. The soul learns that awakening is not a singular event, but a continuous unfolding, a series of small deaths and rebirths, moments of letting go and moments of profound receiving. Each breath, each heartbeat is an echo of this sacred rhythm, a reminder that the journey itself is the destination. This sacred self-awakened holds the wisdom of the ancestors and the dreams of the future, weaving the personal and collective unconscious into a living tapestry of meaning. It listens deeply to the language of symbols and myths, recognizing in them the echoes of the soul's deepest longings and truths. The journey beyond letting go is the journey into freedom, not freedom from life's challenges, but freedom within them. The awakened self meets suffering with compassion, pain with understanding, and joy with humble gratitude. It knows that all experiences are threads in the fabric of individuation, each essential to the blossoming of the whole. In this final illumination, the soul becomes a sacred sanctuary, an inner temple where silence speaks volumes, where paradox is embraced as the very essence of existence, where the divine and human intertwine in a dance of eternal union. The awakening is also a gift to the world, a beacon of light that shines quietly but profoundly in the midst of chaos. It reminds all who encounter it that beneath the masks and shadows, beneath the turmoil and doubt, lies a sacred self waiting to be known and honored. This sacred self is a flame that cannot be extinguished, a star that guides through the darkest nights. It is the voice of the inner guide, the whisper of the soul's deepest wisdom, the song of the eternal human spirit rising beyond the confines of persona and shadow. As the sacred self awakens, it carries the soul forward on the endless journey of becoming, an invitation to walk the path with courage, humility, and grace. Each step is a sacred act, each breath a prayer, each moment a chance to live the mythic story that is uniquely yours. Here, at this threshold, the soul understands that awakening is not an arrival, but a continuous unfolding, an ever-renewing dance of presence and transformation, a sacred conversation between the infinite and the intimate. The path stretches before you, radiant with possibility, inviting you to step forward into the mystery with an open heart and a steady gaze. The sacred self awakened is your true companion, your deepest home, the eternal spark that lights the way. In this presence, you are both the journey and the destination, the seeker and the sought, the question and the answer. The mythic pilgrimage continues, forever new, forever sacred, forever yours. Description: in the twilight where ego loosens its grip, the soul stands at a sacred threshold between the fading of old identities and the birth of the true self. This video invites you into the profound mystery of inner transformation, where shadow and light entwine in the alchemy of individuation. Inspired by Carl Jung's teachings, we explore the symbolic death of the persona and the courageous descent into the unconscious, the dark chrysalis, where authentic rebirth quietly unfolds. Here, surrender is not defeat, but a sacred rite, a necessary letting go that opens the door to wholeness. The shadow, often feared and denied, becomes an essential companion, a wild flame that burns away illusion and reveals the gold beneath. This is the mythic journey of the soul, a pilgrimage through paradox and silence, where the eternal self awakens beyond ego's fragile mask. Step into this liminal space with openness and reverence, and witness the sacred dance between loss and gain, death and rebirth. The path of transformation is not a destination, but a continuous unfolding, a living conversation between your deepest depths and the luminous presence waiting to emerge. Share your reflections below and join the dialogue on embracing shadow, shedding persona and awakening the sacred self within. Carl Jung, Shadow Work, Individuation, Jungian Psychology, Ego Death, Self-Awakening, Archetypes, Inner Journey, Psychological Transformation, Mythic Pilgrimage,